Halloween is coming. Halloween is coming, and about 30% of the American public are criminally insane. In my opinion, about 30% of the American public are criminally insane. And they're insane because they're lonely. They're chronically and miserably lonely. The information society does not provide them with companionship and information necessary to live a good and healthy life. And why it is so serious, why it is so important, because according to the theory of retribution, why it is so important to have good mental health is because you never know. No one ever knows what kind of horror is going to come their way.
Yes, we're back on another episode of GiantArt Reviews. This time, Chapter 4 of Infocracy. That was a clip, a little bit of a deep lore there. There is this great video. It used to be, well, I shouldn't say video, I should say edit. It's really hard to explain, actually. Unless you know, if you've been following me for a long time, you know that I basically made my bones on being a sort of acolyte, if you will, of Nobody TM. And Nobody TM had this one episode in the later seasons. There was like there was season 1, which was more political, and there was like the later stuff that people know about that was more esoteric and platonic and so forth. Some would say even Gnostic. And he had this one called And This Is God. Or And This Too Is God. Sorry, This Too Is God. Where I believe it was episode 8, where he profiled this guy, and he told me, and I think I should, preface this with saying that I believe this gentleman has passed on, and, he hasn't uploaded video in, like, I think, 5-6 years? Ellison Ballard, you can still find his videos, but Nobody TM made a good compilation with, like, his sort of, down-tempo ambient noise music, and it was this guy going around where he was talking about aliens and Gnosticism and socialism and different sort of esoteria that he would read from these different books. And I remember listening to that about 30% of the American public is insane, and I was like floored. I was flabbergasted, and I felt like that was something that I should lead on, because this chapter is called Digital Rationality. Now, it's funny because Byung-Chul, to go back to psychopolitics, if you've been following this long, he talks about the intersection between dataism and dataism, because they operate similarly in some respects, in that they upend the perception of something, the way that data has upended the work of art by making it linguistic, by on the one end destroying language, but also using language, using the intellect to describe the work of art, which a lot of people hate, by the way. I mean, I'm much more of a fan of the German expressionists, but I think that the Dadaists were doing something very interesting, even though they're, commies. But I think that they were doing something quite interesting. And I want to go back a little bit to what he said, like the double entendre from psychopolitics, about dataism and Dadaism, and how they are interlinked. So let me first read you a section from that Dadaism chapter again, just to refresh your memory. So here he talks about how dataism is sort of like a new faith. Data, get it? Get it? Well, actually, it's kind of hard to explain, but essentially, let's read here. Dataism has taken stage with a fervor of a second enlightenment. During the first enlightenment, statistics was thought to possess capacity to liberate human knowledge from the clutches of mythology. And so even Dadaism was trying to liberate the autonomous subject through action, essentially. Accordingly, euphoric celebration occurred in light of such developments. Voltaire even voiced the wish for a new historiography freed from past superstition. Then statistics came along. And now transparency is a buzzword of the Second Enlightenment. Data is supposed to be a pellucid medium, as Brooks describes him. So he's quoting David Brooks about how it's the new faith. The imperative of the Second Enlightenment declares everything must be become data and information. So moving on, it's supposed to free knowledge and so forth. Dataism, it turns out, is amounting to digital dataism or Dadaism. So this is the double entendre that I talked about. But I'm just saying this to refresh your memory. If you have, but if you haven't, if this is part of the free portion, go subscribe to my Patreon. Listen to almost 10. I think over 10 hours in 7 different parts of my breakdown of Byung-Chul Han's psychopolitics. It's well worth the money, folks. Along with everything else. So Dadaism also takes leave of meaningful contexts of every kind. It empties language itself of sense. The act of life has no beginning or end. Everything happens in a completely idiotic way. This is why everything is alike. Simplicity is called Dada. Dataism is nihilism. It gives on any and all meaning. Data and numbers are not narrative. They're additive. Meaning, on the other hand, is based on narration. Data simply fills up the senseless void. So it's kind of like Dadaism, how language becomes nonsensical, the man dressed in tin, the self becomes something that is picked apart. There's a lot of automatism that was even... Okay, so automatism is interesting because it's a lot of the surrealist technique of finding those automatic images that are conglomerated together that come out of the human mind. But this was like too attached to the human for a lot of Dadaists, right? This was surrealism. But Dadaism goes further and says that the pure chaos and nonsense deconstructs the human and liberates us even from those images. Even surrealism becomes too stultified. And, that's why a lot of the Dadaists, they canceled Salvador Dali back in the day. Because surrealism becomes something that is too attached to the image. But big data and dataism does this as well. It renders all of life into a series of input-output mechanisms. So let me read you from Evola, one of Evola's best friends, Tristan Tazara, the Dadaist Manifesto. And remember what Ellison Ballard said here about how people are lonely and information society doesn't give them really much of anything. So here we go. It's really short. This is from the Dada Manifesto from 1918. And so Dada was born of a need for independence, of a distrust towards unity. Remember, data can be centralized as a unity, but as Byung-Chul Han would say, and he's also going to say here in Infocracy when I get to reading it, that unity is something of central planning. There is that reality, but that is also broken apart by the monumental, like the monolith itself of data. Imagine the monolith as some kind of like infinity hard drive, if you will. And so Dada was born for the need of defensive distrust towards unity. Those who are with us preserve their freedom. We recognize no theory. We have no theory, okay? No narration. We have enough cubist and futurist academies, laboratories of formal ideas. Is the aim of art to make money and cajole the nice bourgeois? Rhymes a ring with the assonance of the currencies and inflections slips along the lines of the belly and profile. All groups of artists have arrived at this trust company, underriding their steeds on various comets. So as you know, like the trust is like the corporate trust is like something that's held in trust, right? That is a concern, like an industrial concern, While the door remains open to the possibility of wallowing in cushions and good things to eat, Cubism was born out of the simple way of looking at an object. Cezanne paints a cup 20 centimeters below his eyes. The Cubists look at it from above. Other complexion complicate appearance by making a perpendicular section arrangement and conscientiously on the side. I do not forget the creative artists and the profound laws of matter which they establish once and for all. The futurists see the same cup in movement, a succession of objects, once beside the others, and maliciously added a few forced lines. This does not prevent the canvas from becoming a good or bad painting suitable for the investment of intellectual capital. The new painter creates a world, the elements of which are also its implements, a sober, defined, or definite work within arrangements and arguments. The new artist protests. He no longer paints symbolic and illustrationist reproduction, but creates directly in stone, wood, iron, tin, boulders, locomotive organs, and organisms capable of being turned into all directions by the lipid wind of momentary sensation. All pictorial or plastic works is useless. Let it then be a monstrosity that frightens servile minds, and not sweatening to decorate the refractories of animals in human costumes, illustrating the sad fable of mankind. So in other words, it's essentially doing, Byung-Chul Han makes this brilliant correlation between what big data is doing. They're essentially doing that. They're decoupling us from all narration, all concepts, and all concepts of the self. Right? All concepts, all narrations, all pictures of the human. Big data does this. And when you really think of it, data collection is a surrealist implement. Because the more that data becomes predicated as the only valuable thing, and Byung-Chul Han alludes to this, the more that you see that the human element, or rather the element of culture, of the self, of society, of even why economic activity happens, data becomes the only metric of success. Not what the data is in reference to, because the data is like the signifier, and it's like the signifier that obliterates the signified. It obviates it. It gets rid of it. It's almost as if the data becomes the thing, the gestalt of the data, meaning what is around the data. The data consumes it. Data becomes the only thing of value. Data swallows whole that which it's making in generating and observing and quantifying data into. The real things that data manifests, it's like that's not good enough anymore. Now the data is the only thing that's, Facebook, for example. It's like collecting your data. But collecting the data on what? You become nothing in that equation. You are subservient to a higher force that is then bought and sold, that collects all of your, it's very much kind of like the Deep Dream program, I think. Was that what it was called? Me and Prude talked about it last Digital Archipelago, where it was a way to collect all of your user-generated data to map a perfect phenomenological picture of who you are as a person and what your thoughts and feelings and moods are. It really is sort of like a self-investigation into who you are by what you generate. And so say if that program is a reality, like it was, I don't know if they're still doing it. I think it was Google. Then imagine if you know that you're being manipulated, so you generate false data. But then by generating false data, because it's reliant upon data collected about yourself, does that mean that you have to embrace the polar opposite or the falsity of what you're generating, like on Facebook and social media and so forth? So then those things become yourself. You meme yourself into the opposite by doing this like weirdo OPSEC, like playing around guerrilla ontology, where it's like, oh, I don't want big data to get me, so I'm going to generate false data about myself, but then I have to like really embrace it. Say I'm a metalhead, right? Now I have to go and listen to, I don't know, Neutral Milk Hotel. It's like, eventually you're going to listen to it so hard that you end up liking it. I don't know why I never liked Neutral. I'm not a big fan of most indie, but it's like that's just a stupid example. But the point being is that dataism and dataism, there is obviously a correlation, and maybe Byung-Chul Han just got the name to it. He's like, oh, they sound similar. But it's true, because data, big data, creates a dataistic reality, if you will. It creates the upending of all rooted conditions. It creates the self in this sort of free play, floating existence of pure nothingness, of the mutual origination of data, if you will. Everything arising and ceasing, generating, propagating, being bought and sold, like all of it becomes data. Everything becomes It's like the Matrix, you know, you become the microbits in the Matrix. You don't become a real thing. You're just a computer code. I mean, I'm going too far with this, but let's see what Byung-Chul has to say about this. So, that was a big rant, but, you know, I believe it was worth reading to Zara in the Dadaist Manifesto to see how data is the way that it manifests into obliterating the sort of common markers of what makes us, you know, unique, quote unquote, real human beings. So this chapter is called Digital Rationality. There you go. This is chapter 4 of Infocracy. So moving on. But again, like I said, this goes back to dataism. All right. Dataists believe that the disintegration of the public sphere, the sheer amount of information, and the rapidly increasing complexity of the information society makes communicative action obsolete. Because that's one thing that I feel Habermas didn't account for, is that communicative rationality cannot exist within an infinite sequence or framework. You can only input the discourse and communication in the data set of that communication and those ideas of your given milieu and like nothing more. That's how humans were, you know, evolved or designed or programmed, whatever your flavor is. I believe that there's some design there. I think that we just developed in the way that we cannot input data infinitely. We can only receive connection to what people are saying and thinking and feeling within a given society that we live in, or village, or immediate haplogroup, or whatever. Like, it's, you know, there's a limit to which we can express the empathy required to collect huge sums of data and discourse that Habermas envisions with the rise of the internet and communicative rationality and so forth. So he's quoting, I believe he's quoting Habermas here. The 21st century society is too complex, and thanks to information technology, that complexity is made all too plainly visible to us. To borrow Herbert Simmons' concept, the information to be processed becomes so substantive that it went beyond the bounded rationality of individuals. Hence, communication among people suffers paralysis on a daily basis, making it difficult for Arendt and Habermas. Oh, so he's not quoting Habermas here. Making it difficult for Arendt and Habermas's presuppositions to come into effect in reality. So again, the terminal uber liberals of Arendt and Habermas may have got the information society a bit wrong. So, well, in starting a discussion, citizens in contemporary society are not able to believe in a shared space for discussion. They cannot even share in the consciousness of a point of departure that everyone is participating in a discussion. For the time being, as members of the same community, the public sphere that Arendt and Habermas held as an ideal is not activated to begin with. Faced with the erosion of communicative action, Habermas openly confesses that he is at a loss, says Byung-Chul. But now, here's quoting Habermas. I simply do not know what the equivalent to the communicative structures of the large-scale political public sphere that emerged since the 18th century should look like in the digital world. How is it possible to maintain in the virtual world of the decentered internet a public sphere in which communication circulates so that it includes all of the population? Now, that's really a good question. Now, let me comment a little bit on that. But wait, let me read a little bit. Dataists seek a radical solution. They paint a picture of a kind of rationality that can do without communicative action. For them, big data and artificial intelligence are functionally equivalent to the discursive public sphere that is currently disintegrating. And this equivalence means that Habermas's theory of communicative action is obsolete. Discourse is replaced by data. The algorithm processing of big data aims to capture and include the whole population. Dataists would even claim that artificial intelligence is a better listener than a human being. But let me comment on that about digital rationality, about the internet itself, and how community on one hand is disintegrating, of course. But when you really look at it, community still exists, but it exists on the creation of a digital tribalism that attempts to police its incredibly porous, rhizomatic borders, that attempts to cross-cut through these larger conglomerations, and that we know that this always will devolve because the human mind cannot exist in this, like, this, like, the wired, like, lane. Like, it cannot be like a lane, like, being, like the anime lane. It cannot exist infinitely. It cannot use avatars of itself to communicate one-on-one with people, but yet still be a cohesive whole. Because people will naturally gravitate towards micro-communities. And when the internet expands discourse becomes banal, in a way. It becomes like normiedom. It becomes like, okay, we've heard it all before. People are going to gravitate to the lowest common denominator. People are going to love the spectacle, such as the spectacle that happened last week of this recording. Netting. Sorry, I'm not going to do it. Not going to mention it, but But no, but the point being is that discourse, like, that was actually kind of what they did on Infowars. That was actually quite an interesting feat of Dadaist performance art. Because it's sort of like all the discourses of, like, hyper online, like, right-wing spheres, like, were strewn into the spectacle that the whole world watched. And for the risk of not stepping on anyone's toes, I'm not going to comment further on it. But I'm just saying that, it was quite interesting how the online sphere generates discourse on a micro scale. And when you introduce that to a larger, like, sort of infinite metaplex of discourse, it's like digital technics has a way of spreading things such that they become a spectacle unto themselves. That they become, like, very, like, incendiary, and, like, they burn up in an instant. And, these moments, they fade in and fade out, and people care about the next happening. There's a way in which, communicative action is in one sense made impossible on the one end, but in the other sense is also created anew in, like, hyper-partisan online tribalism that is always reliant upon different curious and interesting ways to police interaction between anonymous people, to police infiltrators, to, these things fall apart. But I think it's very interesting. There's always, like, this sort of philosophic element of, like, okay, say we're attached to infinite communication, and we know that the human mind grinds up against the limitations of that metaplex of communication and data and so forth. What is it like then to expect people to exist within that milieu? How can one grow into a reconciliation with that big data? But really the obvious and logical answer is that we just evolve into online tribalism, because that is what the human mind can cope with. And when groups interfere with other groups, and they go to the mattresses, in other words, it's very interesting to see that dynamic and to see how different ideas will diffuse with each other, and different communities will diffuse with each other eventually. But it's very interesting how online ecologies manifest themselves into reenacting things that are very humanly, but having to reconcile with an infinite plane. There is, in the internet, it's like an ocean. It's true what ZHP said. There's no geography, really. There's little nodes and islands. There's little archipelagos of websites and communicative hubs and group chats and, people that are loosely conglomerated together in a nexus. That's why, like, every glowy that creates, like, these, these internet tracking charts, with the big spheres and the big personalities, that's why they're a net. They're a web. They're not like a hierarchy, in a way. There's bigger nodes and there's smaller nodes. But that has to make sense of an infinite space, like an ocean, that has depths. The internet is a rhizome in that, well, it's not partially, it's arborescent in its development and its, the way that these social media companies guide you. But in terms of, like, everyday interaction, it's a rhizomatic space. It's morphogenic. It expands, it contracts, your little world can go beyond. It very much is like an ocean. You know, people within a ocean or a forest, like not people, but like, you know, animals and fish life and plant life, they will inevitably create, like, you know, those wolves in Germany. They will police their borders. They will find a spot or a milieu that they're comfortable with, but they still have to deal with the fact that there is no solid borders or states or separations or barriers within an online space, the way that there isn't within a natural forest, a dark forest, or within an ocean. An ocean's more of an apt comparison. We call it hyperspace, but really it's oceanic in that sense. And so people inevitably find ways to root themselves that, you know, I shouldn't say totally root themselves, because that rootedness is imploded by online interaction, by the way in which the internet is kind of like an oceanic thing that you can sink into, and there's depths, and there's never truly a border. You know, it's all around you all at once. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the sky or the water or space, but it's more likely an ocean. You know, there's different... The parameters are very porous, in other words. The parameters are within all of your space. It's all around you all at once. So dataism is a way of making sense of that chaos. But then you just sink into that ocean of data. Because data paralyzes you after a while. How can you absorb that much data? You are sinking into an ocean of data. And when you sink into it, then you find yourself lost. Because communicative action is some ways, you know, from the beginning of time, within your tribe or community or whatever, you need discourse to understand who you are, to understand the collective agreements that you share with the people around you. This becomes complicated in the online world. That's why people sink into this almost like this state of nothingness by being wired in. You know, they become kind of like the fantasy of Lane or the Matrix or whatever, in a way, like mentally at least. You lose yourself, especially if that self is not tied to your real identity. Even still, your real identity will eventually be permeated, and you will start to act in real life. Like, how many times, you know, do you bring online things to your real life if you're terminally online enough? Probably a lot. I do this as well. So think of that. Think of like how we exist within our communities, in our society and whatnot. We exist within the milieu of our religion, our race, our culture. But now the internet implodes all of those things. The internet is the main vector for, you know, derootedness in a way, but I don't think that in some ways, you know, you can't rebel against it totally. You have to reconcile with it. You have to create an online version of a sort of something that's an approximation of that rootedness. And, you know, people are trying to do this all the time. Like, what do you think hyper, like, right-wing or left-wing politics is trying to do? It's literally the community of data. It's what you know. These are knowledge communities. Like, what you know is constitutive of who you are and your identity. Like, you know, a lot of right-wingers talk about, like, the need for roots, and I agree. I agree as well. But you're in an environment, an abstract machine, an ocean of data, the internet, that by design, in some ways, is incredibly hard to instantiate a re-rootedness, if you will, rather than a de-rootedness. So anyways, moving on. All right, moving on. So essentially, you know, the point about data is being, like, sort of lacking a discourse. So they seek radical solutions, functionally equivalent. But that whole part about, this is what I wanted to comment about. There's recently been a talk about AI and how you can sort of, you can evade AI detection, because if the AI programmers are programming them to be not, you know, progressive and egalitarian, then racism is really the only test of true, authentic humanity. But and I think it's quite funny. But I know Schwab Real Human was talking about, like, if you had an AI assistant to sort of search internet terms, or to, like, search, go Google Scholar and summarize a paper or summarize news articles. That would be immensely helpful. And there's other AI programs that you can sort of create like dead man switches for that can follow sequences of events that can make things easier. But I think what Byung-Chul means is when you talk about big data and artificial intelligence, they're functionally equivalent. Me and Prue were talking about this too, about how there was the AI GF, or a guy's girlfriend died or whatever, and like through online posting and videos and so forth, programmed an AI to be like her. But then when the guy like confronted this AI equivalent or version of his GF, he says, you're not real, right? And the AI just goes, oh yeah, whatever, I know. It's really quite scary. I mean, this should be stopped right away. But I think that the point about big data and artificial intelligence are functionally equivalent to the discursive public sphere that's currently disintegrating. And this equivalent means that Habermas' theory of communicative action is obsolete. Discourse is replaced by data. Well, essentially, the AI can garner huge swaths of data sets to say that, okay, the public discourse is like at this level, and this is what people care about, and this is the metric by which we can determine that this group of people, this is their consciousness and their thought about things, instead of actually organically interacting with people. The AI can simplify this process, but the problem is when you're caught up within those econometrics and those sort of, let's call them digital techniques, like econometrics, because of course is essentially relying on the economization of discourse, in the sense that, AI is very useful, that sort of digital quantifying brain, the sort of quantification of all things. It's very useful when it comes to the economy and to determine prices and so forth, and the mood in which stocks can go up or down. But when it comes to like actual human interaction, when it comes to actual discourse, that quantity brain approach that AI delivers, the real problem is it delivering you a sample size, a sort of simplified picture, a sort of Spark Notes version of the discourse that is being generated by people organically? Or do you respond to that AI, you instrumentalize yourself, and therefore the AI has to smash down and make a thin gruel of what people really think and feel? That's the problem. You become instrumentalized through those econometrics and through the digital techniques of AI itself. And also, people programming AI, are you just replicating what you think and what you feel back at you? You goon cave yourself, you hug box yourself, in only replicating data that you find useful or meaningful or whatever. You're not really getting true discourse. This is what Byung-Chul is saying. There's some seat of true discourse that happens organically between people. There's a source of authenticity of the human that is being robbed from us by big data. That's the whole point. And you could see how the AI can just generate answers or data sets at you that you yourself have programmed that are essentially just replicating your own biases. It's like academic publishing bias just coming back in fourfold, even though it's got this layer of like, well, technology can deliver us objectivity and so forth. Not really, not necessarily the case. And that's the big problem, is that when you just have metrics that are replicating to you what you think and feel is the correct answer, is the correct the correct picture of what you think is being generated. That's a big problem. So also with AI is that can it truly perfectly replicate discourse? Or can it just give you a facsimile of it? Now, there was this article that went around, I think, a year or two ago. May have been longer. But I thought was quite fascinating. But of course, it was a fake news. It was a false story. It wasn't real. But the potentiality of that could be real. Where I think they called it heaven boxing or something. Where basically, if you have problematic users, instead of like outright banning them from a social media account, what you can do is that You can program an AI to give them an army of followers who are essentially just bots generated by the AI, and you could program them to interact with this problematic user, like I don't know, a guy who's posting gamer words or whatever, and you could keep them basically sloughed off from the organic user base of people. You can essentially cordon them off into their own little heaven box, and they could think that they're interacting with an organic army of followers that can go up and down. You could simulate actual growth that happens organically on social media, and you could simulate like DM conversations and so forth, and you could create this whole life world of online posting around this problematic poster, and you can essentially give them an artificial reality, but yet at the same time they're being cordoned off by the rest of the user base. It's like literally it's like that Twilight Zone where the guy who's a gangster goes to hell, but he doesn't know it's hell, and he's like in an infinite casino where he always wins. He always has a woman by him and so forth. He's like, well, I mean, it's not fun to win all the time. He's like, make me lose a little bit. He's like, well, yeah, we can do that, but he's like, it'll be predictive. He's like, no, make it like real. And then at the end of the, I believe it was the blackjack that said, you thought that you were in heaven? No, you're in hell. And this is, he's like, no, the thing in the world that I love the most, gambling, is just robbed from me. So that's essentially like a heaven box. Like this, you get perfect interaction. The AI programs people like basically fluffering you and pumping you up in this AI simulation of discourse. But think of the absolute demonic like Gnosticism of that. And some people would love that. They would love a heaven box. They would love this AI program that delivers you perfect interaction and praise and so forth, even though it's not really organic. You don't actually have an audience. So I wonder if you could do this to a content creator. This would be ghastly. This would be terrible. If you had a YouTuber that you gave them a botted audience and you essentially like pump them up, but like nobody else can see their YouTube channel. Only the people, they keep releasing videos or vlogs or whatever, but yet it's all bots and all the comment section are just filled with bots. And it's to simulate like a channel that, and say that you have, I don't know, 20K or 100K followers, you have your own little private army of an audience, but really they're just an AI program that's simulating what organic growth looks like on YouTube. And this person like thinks that they have reach. And then when they go to other YouTubers or they go to, other people IRL, they're like, yeah, I got a YouTube channel with 100K followers. Like, wow, great. What is your YouTube channel? And they try to search it. Like, wow, the YouTube channel isn't coming up. But actually, when I find it, I have to like physically hardwire search it in the search tab. That, you go to YouTube, it's like you can search for channels, It says here you only have 5 subscribers. I'm like, what? I have 100K subscribers. And then they show you show the YouTube channel person shows them like, no, here it says 100K. I'm like, that's weird. It only says 5K in my my YouTube channel in the search functions. So again, like it would be quite a terrible thought experiment to actually do that to somebody. But anyways, the point being is that AI simulating discourse is quite terrifying actually. But don't do this. Don't go on. I don't know. It could be like one of those like weirdo online art projects that you could do where you like take a random like low follower YouTube account that like pumps up videos regularly, like a schizo, and just like give them a bot army of 100K followers. And I mean, it would probably violate YouTube service. But say if like an artist could like get approval from YouTube to do this. Obviously, not for YouTube purposes. I'm not platforming illicit activity. I'm saying if YouTube did this like in an artist, like through MoMA or whatever, they're like, oh, I want to do this art experiment, Anyways, moving on. Discourse is replaced by data. The algorithm processing of big data aims to capture and include whole populations. Datists or dataists would even claim that artificial intelligence is a better listener than human beings. Exactly. Just like that guy that brought back his dead girlfriend. There you go. Because really, you just want to have an amplification through the other of what you yourself believe. But the whole point is that you can't really get that in its original sense. A human being that's born in this apparatus of artificial intelligence, they can't gauge what their true thoughts and feelings are because there is no other to give you that. You need an organic other, a big other, to determine what you are and what you believe and think and feel and what constitutes yourself as the self. If an AI can give you that, then it's, are you guiding it through user interaction with the AI? Or is the AI giving you through an inorganic means being programmed by someone else to tell you this is your true self? If you were to keep a Plato's cave with artificial intelligence, keep, a really ghastly, horrific experiment where you take someone from the time of their birth and you give them this Truman Show-like existence, but it's all AI programmed. AI programmed, sorry. I realize I'm saying AI. It's a funny way of saying it over and over again. You give them this Truman Show heaven box-like existence where they think that they're interacting with real people on the internet, but really they're not. And really, it's like, how does your sense of self come about? Because what can you even gauge by, not interacting with anybody? You can't really know your true thoughts or feelings or opinions or where you stand in a particular culture or a society or a group or whatever. That all comes about with interacting with other people. That's be a terrible thought experiment. Of course, the AI would guide you to different things, but are those things really what you truly think or feel or believe if you were given the alternative information? Maybe I'm just being reductionistic. I'm doing this whole Cartesian thought experiment, but Anyways, moving on. We may call this type of rationality digital rationality. That does without communication and discourse digital rationality. Its opposite is the communicative rationality that guides discourse. Communicative rationality crucially involves providing reasons and also being prepared to learn. As Habermas writes, in virtue of their criticizability, rational expressions also admit of improvement. We can correct failed attempts if we can successfully identify our mistakes. The concept of grounding is interwoven with that of learning. So grounding is interwoven with learning. Argumentation plays an important role in learning processes as well. Thus, we call a person rational who, in the cognitive instrumental sphere, expresses reasonable opinions and acts efficiently. But this rationality remains accidental if it's not coupled with the ability to learn from mistakes, from the refutation of hypotheses, and from the failure of interventions. Again, that's the whole point. What I'm saying, you need rationality, you need argumentation to know who you are. So it's like, this is what Byung-Chul is doing. He's just in the way that he posits Agamben and Foucault, and he's saying that no, Foucault is not getting the whole picture by just looking at biopower. Now psychopolitics takes over from biopower or biopolitics. He's saying that Habermas, he's contraposing his own newer concept with an older concept that comes from Habermas. So much less Foucault in Infocracy. Now it's communicative rationality is being bodied and displaced by this newer concept of digital rationality that does away with the main hallmark of communicative rationality, which is discourse itself. Now it's big data and artificiality and AI and so forth. It's like the other is being erased. 20th century, the age of anxiety, that was also a big philosophic quandary if the other can be totally erased, or rather you become a slave of the other. Now it's like the opposite. Byung-Chul is saying we're living in an even worse nightmare. Now it's no longer that the other becomes this totalizing the they, the Heideggerian dictatorship of the they. Now it's about you are erased in the other, or rather, not that you're erased in the other. It's the opposite. The other is erased to you. Now these impermeable, hyper digital mechanisms like AI replicates the other to you. But you feed into that AI, and that AI becomes a seamless mirror that reflects back on you. So really the other is non-existent anymore. The 20th century, the sickness, the fin de sac of that century was that the other was going to erase you, was going to consume you and totalize you. The dictatorship of the they. But the anxiety of this 21st century, according to Byung-Chul, is that you will erase the other and become a self-contained Ouroboros shell, which is not good. You need the other. I hope I'm making that point clear. So anyways, moving on. So now we have Byung-Chul. Artificial intelligence does not reason. It computes. In place of argument. Looks like all those hard AI people. Looks like they're all BTFO'd now. Oh, sorry, Raker, as well. Sorry. So, artificial intelligence does not reason, it only computes. There are algorithms. In the course of the discursive process, arguments can be improved. In the course of the computing process, algorithms are constantly optimized. Difference between improving and optimization, right? They thereby independently correct the mistakes they make. Digital rationality replaces discursive learning with machine learning. In this way, algorithms imitate arguments. From the perspective of the dataist, discourse is merely a slow, inefficient form of information processing, and the validity claims advanced by participating in discourse are the products of insufficient information processing. Again, this is all just like, computing brain. There's only some nerd like Big Yud and rationalists can or the Rocco guy. He got banned recently on Twitter for saying that all Down syndrome people should be redacted, by the way. R.I.P. Bozo, Packwatch, rest in piss, you won't be... I never liked that Rocco guy, by the way. I never liked him. I always said he was arrogant. I don't think he should be banned, by the way. I don't think he should be banned. But rest in piss, you won't be missed. Packwatch, all the stupid memes. But, I do disagree with what he said, of course. That Down syndrome's people should be, anyways. Yeah, and you could have thought that he was going to get banned for saying that under Elon Musk's Twitter. One thing I should say is that if it's true that Elon is just as much of a dataist and believes in artificial intelligence, I truly believe that he's different than a Ray Kurzweil glow-in-the-dark operation. I think that him in like the Theo Horowitz, Andreessen, libertarian transhumanist network that may or may not be funding a certain section of the dissident right. I think that, they ultimately, they kind of do believe that, it's, unlocking human potential. Because Elon Musk is a very pro-natalist type of person. He says that high IQ people should spread their genes. And I think Elon Musk, he's probably secretly based. He probably is secretly pro-life. He secretly is a cream pie nationalist, so he believes in going forth and propagating. I agree with him. His step warrior model. Within marriage, of course, I think that Elon, he's pro-natalist. He wants smart people to have more children. He even admitted this in his interview, the pleasure of procreating. He's got an impregnation fetish. Let's face it. That is a high-minded, aristocratic mindset, a fetish right there to have. In a world filled with birth control and demonizing reproduction and, hideous harpies, just, going there and saying that, having children is evil. Elon Musk is bucking that trend. And all this, like, even though he may be a dataist himself, I think he's probably better than the cabal of, Google-funded, transhumanists like Ray Kurzweil. The evil Molochian, they think that, sacrifice of a certain, through a certain medical procedure, that's sacred to them. That's like, really a sacrifice ritual. I'm not going to go further in case I upload this all to YouTube, but that's the point, is that it's really a sacrifice ritual to them. But Elon, being such a pro-natalist and being such a pro-cream pie nationalist, I mean, really, I think he's better than the average dataist. But anyways, moving on, that's besides the point, but it's not really, it relates to it, because they believe that artificial intelligence can replace the organic, discourse and conversation. That they think, and a lot of these rationalist people, a lot of these Ayala people, these big yud, Rocco Basquilis, Ayala rationalists, they too think that AI can perfect discourse. But there's an art form to conversation. What do you think content mind is? Why do you think I had to get rid of follow the rules? Because I believe that conversation, that podcasting is an art form itself. And there are people that do this. There are people that like, Birdo, and I forget the other guy that does it. Ghost Jail is an art form. Truly. Anyways. So here we have the implicit posthumanism, not in like a romantic, sexy way. Not like you're even a transhumanist, which is, people tend to forget is a subsection of posthumanism. But here we have the sort of implicit posthumanism of these rationalist types, the dataists, if you will. Notice how, again, like I said before at the beginning, how Dadaism and dataism both have a way of erasing, let's call it human intentionality, for lack of a better term. So here we go. So, communicative action, dataists would argue, is only possible where, because of the inability of human understanding to process large amounts of information, our inability to, there is a limited information. Oh no, the shock, the horror. Digitalization, however, creates more information. Of course, he puts that in italics, more information, than any discursive framework can capture. Unless you're some kind of like, some kind of genetic freak of the mind, but normies can't do that. Dataists believe that big data and artificial intelligence make possible an all-encompassing divine gaze that can precisely capture all social processes and optimize them for the benefit of all. In the book Social Physics, How Social Networks Can Make Us Smarter, Alex Pentland, the director of the Human Dynamics Lab at MIT and a card-carrying dataist, writes, quote, "Big data gives us a chance to view society in all its complexity. Through the millions of networks of person-to-person exchange, the millions and the millions of the Rocks fans." Millions and millions. Millions must data. There you go. I managed to wrap up a wrestling reference and a stupid Twitter reference in one. If we had a God's eye view, an all-seeing view, then we could potentially arrive at a true understanding of how society works and take steps to fix our problems. Notice how the Silicon Valley, like some of them, the dataist people in tech and finance, notice how there's an intersection between them and like the new agey, but like the particularly millennial new agey, hippy dippy, you know how like every new age, there's always a recycling of the new age. There's always a coming and going. Now I think the 2010s, or like the 2000s to the 2010s, was sort of like a revival of the 90s New Age, where all these millennials, and I was one of them, I hate to admit it, was reading and like listening to Terrence McKenna and Alan Watts and taking DMT and, listening to Joe Rogan. And yeah, I think that really, there's a cross section between that and then all these people taking tech jobs in Silicon Valley. Because when you think of it, they're both trying to arrive at one thing. They're trying to arrive at the quest for totality, the sort of perfection of recognition in absolute spirit. That's what they want. They want the cessation of a form of the Hegelian process, you could say. One is through the sort of omniscience of God through psychedelics. The other is the omniscience of all humanity from a God's eye view with big data that can arrive at a single nexus point, an Archimedean point from which all humanity and all life flows. That's what they want, essentially. So yes, I know you people, my opinion on the wideness cells, on, that one particular thinker of ironies. But there is a point to say that, okay, when you actually examine the history and the development of these intelligence agencies and how, like, the internet was created by them, more or less, and how they've actually, like, read a lot of these theories from, like, German idealism and elsewhere to posit that, attaining a noumenal sort of a priori synthetic, right? Like, it's hard to explain the Kantian, and Kant is always hard for me because I always have to brush up on it. I'm not like a hardcore German idealist, but let's just say, for example, a sort of synthetic a priori, the sort of postulation of the noumenal realm, which reason needs to postulate in order to work. Let's say that the totalization of knowledge is something that this sort of form of data reason or digital rationality has to posit in order to function as its endpoint, to motivate it to follow this logic through to this heavenly God's eye view, God's shape hole, actually, of all human experience and all things in general. To do this, you need something that motivates that capacity for reason to actually operate, to sort things in the understanding, to splay human experience into a data set that is largely online, that can be recorded and tracked and thrown in together with an infinite, sort of Googleplex of bits of information, right? You know where Google comes from. It's like one of the highest numbers, if I recall. One of the highest sets of numbers. So when you think of it, these intelligence agencies, there's something to it when they say that you can mechanically reproduce something that is quite metaphysical, of postulating a noumenal realm or a theory of forms or so forth, or postulating some kind of like, Gnostic, pleroma, right? Like, this is a source of all gnosis. But these, the glowies that have created the internet, in large part, they're saying that you can essentially take that and you can create you can create a material version of that. Because the dataists, and this is what Byung-Chul, and some people have said that, and I actually am going to do a podcast with my friend Trey on this very soon. People have postulated that Byung-Chul is a secret Christian thinker. And I think it's true in a way, because he's saying that this is almost a neo-Gnostic heresy. This is almost like, there's this great book actually where I have to order it, but I remember, I believe Warren, oh God, speaking of, people used to associate with the thing of ironies. It was either Helios or Warren that said that there's this book that talks about the occultic origins, or it may have been Saturnalia Sundown, that talks about how Hegel was very much influenced by a lot of these European occultist schools at the time. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a compelling case there. And I think that it's interesting because Byung-Chul is saying that these dataists, they don't see the difference between what is the real human authentic source of knowing. And, every philosopher in Western philosophy has prescribed this from time immemorial. So again, that's evidence that he's a Christian thinker, because even Augustine would say this, even Aquinas would say this. Go right back to Aristotle. Not that Aristotle was a Christian. Christianity didn't exist. Well, it existed. I like to think spiritually. It's kind of like how there's parts of the Old Testament that foretells Christ, right? I like to think that Christianity was probably always there, ready to be, knowledge of the cosmos and ages perfected in that moment of Christ's sacrifice. But yeah, of course, Aristotle, he was a pagan thinker, obviously, existed before Christ. So, do he exist before Christ or right at the same time? No, I think before Christ. Yeah. I mean, definitely, yeah. So, wait, let me look this up just so I'm not an idiot. So let me look this up. So yeah, Aristotle was 400 years before Christ, which, I mean, when you really think about human history, okay, yeah, 400 years is a long time, but it's not like 1,000 years. It's, you know what I mean? So, anyways, the point being is that discourse has always been the foundation of human knowledge. You can even say that Christ's parables were like that as well. There's a discursive element. And, there's a lot of people that study, Christian hermeneutics and how it relates to phenomenology that talk about this. But I think that the main difference is the dataists don't believe this. They believe that genuine knowing can be arrived at through artificial means from a totalizing picture of data. So, when really, this is like a Gnostic heresy in some ways. When really, true Christian thinking around this issue, if we were to say that Byung-Chul is like this, secret-based Christian thinker, he's saying that you cannot replicate the way that a human being organically derives knowledge from through dataism, because that will always leave out the nuances and the actual exchange and the artistry of what it means to gain knowledge from the other, from the grand other. That is the point. And Christianity, in a way, is like this as well. It's a reconciliation with the big other through that sacrifice of Christ. Whereas the other was sort of ambiguous or had rituals around its confrontation in the pagan world. But Christ, in a way, is sort of like viewing history as a totality. It is revealing the process of history itself through the final sacrifice. And in a way, it's that one seat of the Christ, consciousness afterwards. Not Christ consciousness in the New Agey type of thing. I mean, like, the consciousness of the Christian universe. Through it, you have a reconciliation of the one with the other. Because what is Christ? Christ is a man and God. Right? The whole Trinitarian. In other words, the individual is with the other and vice versa. There's a reconciliation with the reality of the other. And discourse is an eternal law that becomes an art form. What do you think all poetry is? Poetry, yes, it's a very lonely endeavor in some respects, but I mean, yeah, you could co-write poetry, but there's chain poems and so forth. But it's still it lays bare what language is. You need the other to engage in poetry and writing. I would say even visual art as well. But that's a different mode and that has a different implications. But the point being is that the other is still vital because discourse itself is like an art form. Big data disrupts this. This is what Byung-Chul is saying. But anyways, I will carry on. Let me have a little bit of music break with Philip Daniel. And we'll carry on to the next section.